The first thing is officers are very resistant to change. It's just by nature people are resistant to change. So they have a couple of concerns. The first one is about their pensions. They want to make sure that there's some financial stability, and during the voting process it became evident that they really didn't understand that the pensions weren't part of the conversation. As you know, before I was appointed to this position, I was the Director of Operations for the city. And I've assured them that in that role, I did not have one conversation with the mayor, his chief of staff, the budget director, the comptroller, not one person about taking control of their pensions. So they need to take that off of the table, so they're not worried about their financial futures. The second piece was political interference, that the officers were concerned about elected officials interfering with the way that they do their jobs. And again, I assured them that the way that the ballot language was written, that there was going to be no political interference. So I wanted to deal with the internal piece of it first. And then the external piece is we're actually working on what that assimilation of the police department and city government looks like right now. Finding the efficiencies. You know, we obviously have our own fleet management system. The city has a fleet management system. There are 2 purchasing systems, 2 HR systems. What can we combine and how to make it more efficient? We've gotten one chance in the last 150 years to reinvent the place, and that's how we're approaching it now. So I've told all of our commanders, both civilian and commissioned here, that everything's on the table. Everything, let's look at the way we do business. And if you ever had that moment where you said, you know, if I was in charge, I'd want to change this, well, now's your time. Now's your chance to do it. So let's look at how we make the business better. So what have we done so far? In November, we had the senior staff from the police department sit down with their counterparts in city government, along with the mayor and then Chief Isom, and start the dialogue. We have the follow-up to that meeting scheduled in the next week to sit down and hear the first blush at plans about how we're going to assimilate the 2 into each other. And so I suspect to start having some action steps within the next 30 to 60 days. I think as you look around, the first thing is we're mandated by state statute on the number of police districts we have at 9. That has been in place since before I was born. So I think it's important that we start to look at how to efficiently deliver services. One of the things that I've told everyone is that local control is going to be seamless to the citizen, to the people that call 911. So as I look around the city, the police districts over the last 30 years have changed, and demographics have changed, and crime patterns have changed in population. So we're going to redraw the district boundaries, trying to keep neighborhoods intact, and then distribute officers throughout the city as equally and as equitably as we can to focus on crime. I think our method right now of hotspot policing is paying dividends. Not only do what we've learned is random patrols have some impact, but it's limited. What we've learned is hotspot policing is the way to go. So what we're going to do is put officers into the areas that are most challenged, that have the biggest problems. And sometimes we will go block by block. And not only in the neighborhoods that are having the problems, but at the time of day that they're having the problems. So if we need to put more officers on the afternoon watch, we'll put more officers on the afternoon watch. If there are more problems, you know, at 8 o'clock at night, we'll put officers at 8 o'clock at night. We want to make sure that we have the resources in the places when they need them. Actually, I believe that the citizens of St. Louis give the police department $173 million a year. They entrust us with their safety, with their tax dollars. I believe they have a right to know that their police department is doing a good job. So what we've looked at is as the Board of Police Commissioners is transitioning out, as local control is transitioning in, I looked around the country for a model of civilian review that I think is fair to the community and fair to the officers. One of the models that we've seen that I really like is one where internal affairs, when they're notified of a complaint, and there are a variety of ways they can be notified of a complaint. A person can come in and do it in person. We can be notified by mail, and there are several off-site satellite locations where complaints can be taken as well. Once internal affairs is notified of a complaint, they go through an investigative process and conduct an investigation to really find out, is there any are there facts to back up the complaint? Did the officer do what they're accused of? Then once that investigation is done, that investigation is then handled to a civilian review board to look at, to see if the investigation was thorough, to see if all of the witnesses and the victims were questioned and asked the appropriate questions, to make sure all the evidence was looked at. And then the civilian review board has two options. They can either say, yes, it is a thorough investigation and we support it, and then it comes back to the police department and the chief for the meting of discipline. Or if they have additional questions, he goes back to internal affairs with a list of questions. And this is much like we do with the circuit attorney's office now. If we present a case to the circuit attorney's office and they have additional questions, they give us a supplemental work request. I think it's important when we talk about civilian review is that this community has a right to know what their police department is doing. I absolutely support that. We also have a right to make sure that the officers receive due process. And one of the concerns that the officers have is that the civilian review will be used to try them in the court of public opinion. We ask our police officers to go out and do dangerous jobs. We ask them to make split-second life decisions all the time. I think we have to make sure that we have a process that is fair to them as well and doesn't try them in the court of public opinion, but actually tries that looks at the allegations based on training, based on their actions, based on the resources that they have available, and does a thorough job of that. I think the question that we have to ask is, what do we want a civilian review board to accomplish? And I think everybody would agree that they want a civilian review that validates their police department and their tactics. Something that we have to be cognizant of is, just as the civilians have the right to make complaints against police officers, the police officers have the right to due process. The officers are most concerned about being compelled to testify in a court of public opinion in front of a civilian review board, which would be subject to open record laws. So the process that we talked about was one that would protect those officers' rights. The other thing that you have to be cognizant of is how do you compel a police officer to make a statement? Internally, we have the ability to do that as a condition of their employment. The question is does that condition of employment extend to a civilian review board? And it's the officer's Garrity rights that basically says that we can compel them because of their employment status to make a statement to us. We'd use that quite frequently. Those statements are taken outside of a criminal investigation, and if it's a criminal investigation, the officers are compelled to make a statement under their Miranda rights. They're two separate levels and two separate statuses. Those are very complicated issues, and to say that we simply want to compel officers to testify in front of a civilian review doesn't take into account the differences between Garrity and Miranda and the officers' rights. So if we're looking for a transparency, the ability for the public to look at their police department, we think that conducting a thorough investigation, having that investigation reviewed to make sure that all of the questions are answered, that there are no, to make sure it's 100%, to make sure there are no lingering questions. We think that's what a civilian review should do and could do. I think each community has their own level of expectation. Some communities are compelled by consent decrees to have civilian review. We're going into it with our eyes wide open and in a more voluntary approach. Denver is one that has a very good model about civilian review, which is similar to ours. Mediation is also a part of civilian review and our discipline process that I think could be utilized to help instill a higher level of confidence in the department. So I don't want to be critical of other cities, because what works for them works for them. What we have to find is a model that works for us. But I certainly have been on the record almost from day one saying that I support the idea of civilian review. Now the question is how do we structure that? It's interesting, we just came from a meeting with the Black Caucus to talk about that, and that's one of their issues, and I've agreed to sit down with Alderman Kennedy and his group and talk about what we can do moving forward in the future to institute a civilian review, as well as instill confidence in the community and the officers that it's a fair process.
Yeah.